morning, good afternoon to in-house counsel from all across America. Welcome to In-House Connect. My name is Shai Mahani. I'm the CEO and co-founder of In-House Connect, and I'm thrilled to have you here with us today. Thank you for spending your breakfast time or your lunch time with us. And special thanks to our fantastic sponsor, Pramata, and our amazing, multi-talented, just an amazing person, our presenter today, Foster Sayers, who is going to put on a wonderful presentation on and teach us, frankly, how to make the case for contract management and get business buy-in. This is our 60th event of the year so far, and I'm wondering, are you here for the first time or have you attended IHC event in the past? It looks like we have about 80-20, so 20% new and 80% returning. So welcome to the new people to In-House Connect and welcome back to the returning people. And special shout out to the 19% of people who have attended more than 10 IHC events. Thank you for your support. Okay, today's event, making the case for contract management, how to get business buy-in. Our presenter today is Foster Sayers. Foster is an experienced legal and business professional with experiences ranging from founding a company and raising capital to implementing best practices for leading private equity firms, Bain Capital and Vista Equity Partners. He joins Pramata from Vertifor, the Roper Technologies company, and was a successful Pramata customer. Foster is passionate about using his technical knowledge to help legal professionals become more effective in their practice. We are very lucky to have the multi-talented, and I mean multi-talented, Foster Sayers on with us today. So with that, I will turn things over to Foster to get us started.
Thank you very much, Shai. So, hey, everybody, Shai introduced. I am Foster Sayers and appreciate you guys spending some time with me today to talk about how to make the case for contract management. Importantly, how to get business buy-in. So today, I'm going to take you through this agenda on how to get contract management understood from the impact to the business, how you kind of align your why, right? Your noble why. Why are we doing contract management? And understanding why that should be focused on your stakeholders, right? That are in your business, not just you. I'm going to share key tips for planning your goals. And then I'll talk through some specific benefits that are realized specifically for sales, finance, and legal. I'm going to talk to you about how you can calculate a tangible return on an investment specific to your business. And then I'm going to close out with two really important points, which is how to get money for your project and how to build and make your case for contract management. And then we'll have an open discussion and Q&A, and you can ask me your questions. So let's get started. The first thing I want to focus on is that this is about demonstrating the value of contract management across the business, right? Contracts can be painful for legal, but they are relevant to your entire business. And the first point of the way that we can talk about value in this context relates to the ability to increase your scalability and efficiency around contracts, especially as the legal team. So this is related to reducing the time that you spend researching your contracts, looking for them in databases. It allows you to manage more contracts with your existing team. And you can also empower sales, finance, and services with self-service contract visibility and access. This pillar here is tremendously valuable. And it's something that when I first started my experience with contract management, that I really saw this play out firsthand. So before joining Pramata as their general counsel and chief evangelist, I was a super user of the software at my prior employer, Vertifor, for 5 years. And I was really focused on implementing it in furtherance of these best practices that we were implementing through that private equity ownership cycle, right? And given all the priorities that I had, being able to not have to pull contracts for the business, giving them self-service access, that was tremendously valuable, not just to me, but everyone in the business who had a task with a nexus with accessing contracts or understanding those terms. And it's something that is really important for us, right? As we always see the scenario play out where the business grows faster than our headcount and legal. So as we enter into these economic uncertain times, a lot of the focus will be on cost savings. And one thing that contract management helps with is avoiding automatic renewals, understanding price increases. It also allows those companies that grow by acquisition, many of us do, to avoid duplicate vendor expenses or to consolidate multiple contracts. These are common challenges that we have at businesses that contract management can provide a lot of value in solving. But it's more than just the cost savings, right? This is about one of the things that we are really tasked with as the in-house counsel, right? Which is managing the risk of the company. And you can better do that when you can readily facilitate contractual compliance across all of your contracts with the right contract management solution. You can have a single source of truth for your commercial relationships across your business. And you can also readily report out on and understand exposure to certain risks in your contracts. And with the right contract management, you can do that proactively. The big thing that I talk about with my peers there is that we don't often have very unambiguous ways to show value to our internal business partners. And being able to deliver them reports showing them certain things like, hey, this is what's renewing in the next 90 days, or these are the number of contracts with termination for convenience that we should consider, renegotiating with our customers to getting them onto a multi-year term. That's the kind of proactive thing that contract management positions you to do, not just to provide value to the business, but really to help legal underscore its value to the business, which, as we know, isn't always easy to do, especially when you're fighting that cost center perception. And for this pillar of value, right? This is what everybody values, growing revenue. So good contract management should help you shorten your sales cycles. And it can do that in a variety of ways, right? One is when you centralize intake, you lower that attack surface for legal, and you make it more efficient to manage the work that comes in. But also, when you have a really good contract management and you have, say, all of your contracts digitized with a set of customers, what that allows you to do is understand very quickly, how did we address this term in the past? Not just generally, but as we know, about 80% of our business, right? It's the 80-20 rule. 80% of your business is with your existing customers. So what's really useful is being able to quickly go back and reference, well, what did we agree to with them before? Is this ask reasonable? Is it consistent with the history of our commercial relationship? And then ultimately, this is about helping the sales team, right? When they're not spending time looking for contracts, understanding when their customers, other subscriptions and products and assets that they own from you renew, that's more time that they can focus on selling, which is the activity that provides value to the business. So this kind of value is really what you want to be able to understand and also speak to when you are talking with your business, because contract management is an investment, and to invest in it, they need to understand the value. And by really being good at articulating these 4 areas of value to your business, you're going to best position yourself to ultimately get buy-in to the solution that you want to pursue. So what is really important to think through when you're doing one of these projects is that you really want to have alignment, and you want to align your why with the business. So I'm going to start by going over what alignment is not. And what alignment is not is taking a legal priority, which is like, I want to have control of my work. I want tools that make it easier for me to do the stuff that I'm doing. The business priority is going to be about controlling costs and investing tools that deliver value to the business. So here are some examples of what alignment is not. Solving something that's only painful for legal, but not the rest of the business. Tools that make it easier for legal to manage work, but add process and time to contracting overall, right? The business does not want to decrease its contracting velocity. The business does not want to impose data entry on the people that are requesting contracts from you. So an NDA solution, right, is a perfect example. If it's not a revenue contract, the business won't value it. Yes, we in-house attorneys do not like spending time on NDAs. But if we invest in a solution that that's all it does. Well, when budget gets tight, what's the first thing that they're going to ask? Your NDA solution, right? Because the business, that's not important to them. It doesn't provide value to them, it just provides value to you and legal. So what is alignment then? Well, it's when you align these priorities in legal with the business priorities, and you look for a solution that supports the strategic goals of the business. When we evaluated our contract management solution for our revenue contracts at my prior post, we were focused on ensuring the solution allowed us to support the strategic goals that the ownership at the time, Bain and Vista, had for our business. And so for us, we needed to understand when contracts renewed. We need to understand how long their subscriptions were to support strategic sales motions, right? Without that data, we would not be able to be effective in using the sales force that we had against the large customer base that we had. So being able to tie those things clearly together made it a slam dunk for the business to buy into what we were proposing. And where there's not maybe some very obvious strategic goal of the business, there is always just operational improvements that you can achieve and support with a contract solution. So often, we as a business are not fully executing to the fullest extent against our agreements. There may be opportunities there that we don't understand because we just don't have insight into what's in our contracts. And so being aligned relative to, by having this contract management, this positions us to have better operations commercially on a whole, is alignment. And finally, if you can increase your contracting velocity, if you can do more contracts more quickly, then the business is going to support that primarily, right, on the sales side, because more sales contracts means more revenue, right? And that velocity is going to fuel your business's growth, and there will always be alignment relative to that type of solution. So my pro tip here is if you prioritize better revenue contracts, that's always going to lie with business priorities. Now, you may have a business where the opposite is true because of the nature of your business and the way that you engage with vendors. But, there are likely, if you align that relative to maybe the velocity is not as important with your vendor operations, but understanding the renewal terms, understanding where they have opportunities to execute price uplifts against you is really important and is going to align. I want to talk about how you can really get buy-in in kind of the three key departments that I think about when I think through how contract management challenges impact the various departments in a business the most. And so with sales, the challenges there with a lack of contract management are there's slow contract turnaround times, and they don't know where a deal is sitting, which of course then becomes anxiety. And when that anxiety becomes painful for sales, what do? They send you an email asking for the status and copy your boss. And it's like, really? Or the best is when they call their manager to call your manager to ask you what the status is. That's really my favorite. It's like, you forgot how to ask me, like, what's going on? But that's what happens when they don't have any visibility into where their deal is. And additionally, this is a challenge when they don't have visibility into where a deal is, but also where executed contracts sit, right? When they're looking up contracts, trying to pull them, or reaching out to legal and waiting on you or talking to you about a contract, they're not selling. And it also becomes a struggle to understand what's renewing when, and that can impact revenue opportunities. Customers may want to co-term new products, and not being able to articulate that in the sales cycle can delay or prevent opportunities. And it's very limiting, right? When they cannot support their account with ease of access to the contracts which underlie and embody that commercial relationship. So what's the promise of contract management for sales? Well, now they can centralize their contract requests, and they can have automated workflows so that the way that they engage legal has become easier. The lift is lighter. They're configuring a request within a system versus taking a bunch of data that they'd already put into their CRM, lacing it into an email that then goes into a legal inbox that doesn't give them any insight. And that self-service access is really something that's important. And I'll come back to that and I'll touch on it multiple times in this presentation. And the reason for that is because it is such a critical benefit of contract management. It's something where at Vertafore, we were able to measure hundreds of hours in savings to our legal department by virtue of having this self-service access to contracts available to not just sales, but all the folks who needed that access. And I'll share a link to an article that I had published in the ACC docket recently about the benefits in that regard. But also knowing your renewals, right? Like that's a really important inflection point in your commercial relationship. So knowing when they happen is important. And ideally, your system will alert you before that renewal. So sales can get out in front of that, especially if you have tools that tell you, what the NPS of that customer is, right? So for the accounts that are yellow and red, they can make sure at renewal time that they're addressing that customer's need and making them happy. And further, this summary of the entire contract, right, that gives you an understanding of what is our footprint with this customer? What do they own from us? We should be able to see that from their contracts view very easily. And where systems are newer relative to CRMs that you haven't built out all the assets and it's not clear what customers own because there's been legacy agreements, there's been acquisitions. Having a central repository for all of your contracts, which embody all of those commercial relationships and set forth every product they own, that gives you that understanding of that footprint in a single view that really benefits your sales teams when they're trying to expand that footprint with your customer. Finance will love contract management. Why? Because they probably have challenges where they don't know how to operationalize price uplifts. That's something where in an economic time where sales may start to lag, then your revenue opportunities are going to come from doing things like increasing prices on your existing customer base. And so finance can't operate that if they don't understand what those rights are in the contracts. And that also impacts challenges around unwanted vendor renewals and misnegotiation opportunities, because this contract renewed with the vendor and it just happened. Nobody was able to talk to the vendor, to negotiate price uplift. It just happened. And it keeps happening, right? It's a big problem for a lot of companies, and finance does not like it. It's also a challenge where there's long drawn out contractual process related to mergers, acquisitions, divestitures, because there has to be due diligence on these contracts. And without a contract management system, that is a long manual process. And so there's also a challenge where a lot of times with finance tools, there's a long time to value and it's hard to get adoption. And so this is a struggle for them. So why do they benefit? Well, when you flip the script, they can easily and automatically identify opportunities for price uplifts tied to things like, say, CPI, right? So much talk about inflation. How does inflation impact us in our commercial contracts? Well, that's going to be expressed where there is a trigger in some sort of price uplift that is tied to CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index, which is the measure of the increase in consumer goods. And that is something that if you don't know if it's in your contracts, that can be either a missed opportunity relative to customers who you may have historically had some sort of greater of paradigm where you can uplift them by the greater of, say, 5% or CPI. Well, traditionally CPI has been under 5%, and then, suddenly it was above. So being able to know that is important. Similarly, that's where you can see where you have exposure with vendors if CPI is the metric, right? Because you want to get out in front of those to see like, hey, are you guys really going to, uplift us by 8%, or can we talk about this? But finance isn't in that position if you don't have good contract management. And that's supported by the ability to do these reports, right? Sending out reports so that they know this is what's coming up for renewal in Q1. And I'm sending you the Q1 report on October 1st, because we know that we have maybe 90, 60, 30 days of notice in order if we're going to, get out of some of these relationships. Also, when you go to do an acquisition or a merger, or you're divesting of a unit, being able to have all of their contracts ready, organized, reportable, makes it so that due diligence happens in minutes. I know this because we at Vertafore were sold by Vista and Bain to Roper Technologies. And the due diligence was greatly accelerated. Why? Because I very quickly, single-handedly, with my repository as a solution from Pramata, put together that data room in a matter of hours instead of weeks, and had all the contracts organized. And then I created reports like, hey, here's all the contracts where we have to provide notice of acquisition. Here's all the ones where we actually have to get consent to assignment. And it was awesome, right? And just imagine how happy the outside counsel working the deal were, especially in the money saved on due diligence. But this is also about a quick win, right? Getting a high value challenge nailed down first, which is like, we have a centralized repository, right? That's really the big benefit to finance. The workflow tools and contract intake, it's helpful to sales. I'll talk about how that's helpful to legal. But for finance, having that centralized repository where you can report out on these kind of contractual commitments, that's really beneficial. And it's also a solution where it can be implemented much more quickly than a lot of typical enterprise applications for that department can be. And when it comes to you folks, I mean, you guys will resonate very strongly with this, right? We have so many challenges around our time. And I think all of us know that to be really effective as attorneys, you have to be an organized person. And we know that being organized takes time. And certainly I have found more and more success the more ways that I seek to automate my ability to be organized in my practice. And what that does, right, is all that time that you spend on administrative tasks, like searching for contracts in various locations that they're stored by your business, filing executed contracts, organizing them into folders, renaming them with new filing, like naming conventions. And then also all the time you spend answering questions from the business. When does this contract renew? How much notice does this customer have to provide, right? That's a lot of time that you take up. And it's not like you needed to go to law school in order to do those things kind of work. But we all know that if you don't take the time to be organized, like that bill becomes due at some point, right? Because when there's an issue, then you're like, well, crap, I got to organize all this stuff so I understand it to address this issue. And the other problem we have, right, is it came up when we talked about the benefit to sales, which is that they feel like we're a black hole. They're like, I send it to legal and it goes into this black hole. I don't know when they start working on it. It's a process that really doesn't benefit anybody, right? For legal, they do not want to be interrupted to have a status check, right? It's like we're working on their stuff. That's why yours is not ready, But reasonably, right, for sales, I mean, I've had at Vertafore, we had customers who had deals that were 5K, customers with deals of 7K, and I was working on all of them. And so, when I would get an escalation from a seller with a deal that was 5K, I mean, was I annoyed? Yes, but I understood, because for them, that deal is the most important deal. And so when they become anxious about it and that anxiety becomes painful, it's going to manifest and it's going to get reflected back at me, right? And unfortunately, the only thing that I can do is reply back with the status because I don't have a way without contract management to provide that insight. And the other problem that stems from this, and the challenge that we have, is that we don't have an easy way to see what we've done historically with our contracts, to look up how many times have we agreed to that actually, or have we ever agreed to that before? And if we agreed to that before, with whom did we agree to that? Was it a customer who was also, 5K ARR, or was it a 7 or 8K customer with that kind of ARR, right? Because that is obviously going to influence how we treat a deal. We're looking at it in the present time, but that's a challenge. Most of us can't do that easily. And so what's the biggest challenge then? Well, the biggest challenge that we have as in-house attorneys is getting like heat for the amount that we're spending with outside counsel, right? And those pressures, I think, are only going to go up, right? Especially the way things are shaking out economically. So that happens. Why? Because when we're spending hours like pulling contracts for the business, answering questions about notice and renewal dates and filing contracts and renaming them and all of that stuff, well, then those are hours that we're not spending exercising our legal expertise, right? The stuff that we did go to law school for. And when we can't do that work requiring expertise goes where? It goes outside. And so that challenge is real. But the good news is that you can solve it with great contract management. So benefit to you is right away, you're going to eliminate a ton of time that you're spending on busy work, administrative work, because you're going to have a solution that does it for you, right? And this also is going to help eliminate those escalations. Really, as I joined Pramata and we in the product team finalized the design of our intake tool, I really said, for me, the goal was, I just want to never have another attorney have that whole escalation happen, right? Have that acute pain of these status checks, especially the really gross ones where it's like, your manager is calling my manager to like, why? Really? But that can be eliminated with a tool that gives that visibility to both people on the status, right? So that the moment you start working on the contract that's been requested, that seller gets a notice and they know, okay, the work has begun, and they can see it throughout the life cycle, right, of that creation. That's the solution benefit to you in legal, but also sales, as we talked about before. Having the key terms extracted, right, so beneficial to you because it's such a time saver. Like the days of Control F and like searching for a term in your document are over, because you don't even need to open a document with the right contract management solution. Repository like we provide, that's all digitized. You can just hover over the key term, you can see it and get to it in seconds. So it just accelerates everything, every task when you need to know the key data. And that self-service access, again, right? I told you I was going to mention it again, and here I am, right? Because it translates into hundreds of hours that the business is answering questions on their own and not asking you for them and not relying on you in order to get to the next step, right? Which is the step that comes after I've understood this thing about the contract that I need to understand, whether it's telling my customer when they can reduce licenses, or whether it's, when can our AR team suspend this customer for non-payment? What were their payment terms? Things like that, all accelerated with self-service access. So one of the things that's tough though, right? So you're like, look, you're preaching to the choir. I am actually here today, Foster, because I had a pretty good sense that these challenges and benefits would come to me. But again, so much of the game, right, and getting business buy-in is making sure that we're really able to outline and articulate this value. And so sometimes, right, it helps to have somebody set us up to do that. And so while what I presented may not have been revolutionary so far, I do want to get into what I feel is a really important framework when you're trying to get business buy-in. And that comes to the topic of how to calculate ROI for a contract management solution. So for those new to that term, ROI, that means return on investment. And anytime your business spends money, they want to know what's going to be my return, right? If I put in $1, how many dollars am I going to get back from that? And so when you quantify the ROI, right, and you talk about these quantitative points, the first three can kind of be blended together, which are attorney salaries, paralegal, legal ops type salaries, and reducing the spend on outside counsel. So when you have contract management, what that means is you can get more out of the resources that you have. So when everyone in your organization is spending less time on these administrative tasks, that means more time to do their primary activities, right? So instead of adding another attorney, instead of adding another paralegal, instead of adding another legal ops person, instead of sending more work to the outside, we can be much, much more efficient and have much, much more time by having a really effective contract management solution. So how you quantify that, right, is look at that. Try to get a sense of what amount of time you think could be saved and what the value you would associate with those people, right? So for you, you can say, look, these are things that we need to be better at. To be better at them would require me to add another legal ops person and another attorney or another paralegal or whatever it might be. But you can also justify that by saying, look, I believe that based on, you can read my ACC docket article. You can read, there are a lot of people putting out great stuff about the benefits of contract management. And you want to use that to say, look, like these are the amount of hours that I think my team would have. And so even if you're not saying like, look, I would need to invest this much in resources in order to like realize these benefits for the business, you can also try to estimate, look, I imagine that we'll have this many hours back and we'll rely on outside, and that will reduce our outside counsel spend by, right? How that works out is something that, you can think through, but the more that you can quantify that for the business, the easier it is for them to be like, of course, like this is going to save us, $80K in the first year and it costs us $40K, let's do it, right? But you can also talk about how you can identify sales opportunities, right? Understanding that footprint contractually and finding out where you have opportunities. And additionally, for the finance team, right? When we talked about realizing price increases, if you're not doing that, then that's something your business, if they're not, they're going to start looking at, right? As sales slow down, they're going to look at price increase opportunities. So being able to show, hey, if we invest in contract management, we're going to be able to realize these price increases. And, if you just baseline, say, a 3% uplift on current revenues, then it's going to pay for itself, right? You can figure that math out. And additionally, you save money, right? So unintended vendor renewals, right? The first time that you don't renew some contract for, similar in value to what you're spending on contract management, it's paid for itself, right? But I really tell attorneys and legal ops and paralegals and whoever it is that's leading the contract management effort that you don't need to fall into the trap of just speaking to the quantitative ROI. Because for you, based on your level of insight or access to certain information, coming up with, solid math on what that quantitative ROI might be difficult, or that math might be a little fuzzy and may not be super compelling. But the good news is that you can say, look, there is also a qualitative return that we will have as a business that you can't put a dollar figure on, right? The best companies in the world pursue operational excellence for the sake of being operationally excellent, right? And so you can talk through how qualitatively contract management, we're going to have the ability to quickly respond to urgent issues. So back in February, the parent company of Vertafore said, hey, we're not doing business with anyone in Russia anymore. You have 90 days to figure that out. Okay, well, what do we do? Well, good news. I had a contract management solution from Pramata. So I typed in the word Russia and I just Googled in my contracts. I saw every contract where Russia was a word. I could see very quickly which ones were just like Zoom with the Russian dial-in number, and I could identify which ones were with actual business entities, right? Created my report, sent it out to the business. On day 0, we know what we have to figure out in the next 90 days. If we didn't have that, that's a couple weeks exercise maybe to track down everything and make sure we have the total visibility, what we're trying to confront, right? So with contract management system, right, instead of an unexpected question about a contract from the business being a moment of panic, you're like, my time to shine. And with a solution like we offer from Pramata, you can do that. The thing that I also talked about before on the M&A part, right? If that's something your business is doing, then the qualitative outcomes there should be obvious, right? Because everyone struggles to figure out what contracts they have that you're taking over, duplicate vendors, all of those things. That doesn't have to be a mess. It can be very straightforward with contract management. And the better customer experience is something that's really important to consider because, if your customer calls in and they're like, hey, I want to reduce 5 users because we just had a layoff, right? When can that happen? When's I don't know my subscription renewal, da, 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 da. Well, you don't have your contracts organized and you're like, well, let me get back to you. And it takes a couple of weeks to get back. It's not a good customer experience. But it's also, you get a better internal reputation at legal when you have democratized this access to contracts and contract information, because so often we can be a bottleneck, right? So that customer experience I'm talking about, well, what happens when that person that takes that call from the customer can't find the contract? Reach out to legal. They say, hey, I would like this contract. When legal provides that contract back in seconds, they are loved by the business. When they say, please allow up to 2 weeks, they are not loved by the business. How do I know that? Well, that's what I walked into at my former post. I was told by the incumbent legal team, hey, if someone asks you for a contract, let them know it could take up to 2 weeks. That's our default reply. And I'm like, really? And then I had a contract actually that took me 2 weeks till I was able to track it down because it was this legacy contract and it's weird server location. I was like, this has to be better. Unfortunately, I had the business commitment to do that. And we did implement a solution and it changed. And it was so appreciated by the sales team there that I was named business partner of the year to the sales team. That same year, I was an employee of the year. So these efforts, right, the qualitative part, people feel that, right? They feel it when their jobs are easier. And this last point on the ability to scale, you have to be able to do that, right? You have to be able to take on more contracts and manage more contracts without immediately going to outside counsel and immediately asking for more headcount. And the only way that you can do that is if you have a system where it's really automating your ability to be organized and taking on those heavy lifts administratively so that you can be great at exercising your expertise. So I want to pause now and I want to have my pal Shai run. And so look, there's no shame in answering yes or no or answering no to this because look, we don't make purchases a lot, right? That's not something that we do. It's not like the cyber team where we're constantly evaluating new tools, right? For monitoring endpoints or firewalls or this, that, and the other, right? We just don't do it a lot. And so because of that, we just might not have experience with our company's requisition and procurement process. And so as we head into kind of the next group of slides, what I wanted to get an understanding of is, do you know how to request funding for contract management at your solution, at your company today?
Foster, I'm going to just jump on and say, thank you for everybody for answering the poll. We have a little under 50%, so we'll wait a little bit longer. And just remember, if you have any questions for Foster or comments, drop it into the chat and we will talk about it in the post-presentation Q&A. And then we'll also have a little bit of virtual networking, so be sure to stick around for that. Back to you, Foster.
All right, so we got a pretty good split here. So about half know, which is awesome, and about half don't, which honestly, I wasn't quite sure what I would see, but that sounds about right, that about half of us do and half don't, because again, right, it's just not something that happens a lot. So what I want to do is I want to talk you guys through how to get that money for your project. Because even if you do know the procurement process, There's still some work to be done relative to making sure that you actually get the money for your project. And, you still may have some work to do relative to building and making your case. And I'm going to make sure you know how to do that. So where do we start when we want to get money? Well, we should understand our company's budget process. So ask yourself if you know this. Who owns your department's workbook? Sometimes legal owns it itself. If you're the GC, it may be you. If you're in a legal department, if you're, say, like a legal ops professional on the call today, it might be your GC. But you should know that, because that's your insight into where your budget is or what it is, right? And if you understand that, you should also understand who is your internal business partner in FP&A. So what's FP&A, if you don't know? That's financial planning and analysis. Bigger companies have these roles. Smaller companies, if they don't have someone who is like exclusively focused in this role, they still have someone who performs this function, right? And so what you should try to understand and know is who in your company does FP&A. This is also an important person to know generally. If a company has multiple of them, make sure you know who the business partner is for your department. But it's really important to know who this person is and to be friendly with them, right? Because they will be the ones that are likely partnering with you on the budget process. So that is a relationship to invest in heavily. And if you're maybe not in a company that has a lot of bureaucracy or sophistication, or just smaller, right? Then just know who approves adding budget at your business, right? If your budget is X and you know that you're going to need more money in order to fund your contract management process, you may not know how much exactly, but it being bigger than zero makes it fall outside of your budget, then make sure that you really understand who has to approve you adding to your budget for contract management. Who is that person? And it should be unambiguous to you, right? Because that is the person that you want to make sure is on board. Now, it may not be a person. Who could be a committee, right? There could be some sort of spend desk, a thing like that. But there often is an ultimate approver, right? And you want to be sure that person is not only aware of your project, but is excited about it and totally understands unambiguously what it is about, right? The person that you need to sell most of all is the person who approves adding to your budget. You will have stakeholders to sell to as well, right? But the stakeholder selling isn't going to matter if you haven't gotten the person who holds the budget to approve. So save yourself some time before you go on your campaign with all your internal stakeholders to be like, we're going to do this contract management thing, because you're going to get everybody excited. And then the budget guy is going to be like, you guys seem really excited about this. Too bad we're not going to do it, So that's why I say, when you're building that coalition, understand this and make that person super excited about what you're going to do and understand fully the value of it, because that will be your path to getting a budget. Now, not only do you need to get a budget, right? But let's say you have the budget, but you then have to actually go about getting the contract management contract approved, right, with a particular vendor. And so you need to understand your procurement process for that to happen. So this is separate, right? You have the dollars to spend, but now how do I actually spend them? How does that requisition get its way through my procurement function? So make sure that you know how you request that spend from procurement. Make sure you understand when an RFP process is required, like what are their dollar thresholds, right? Because if your policy requires an RFP for a dollar threshold and your contract management system that you think you really like is going to be under that, well, then don't be forced into an RFP process that you aren't required to go through. But if it is required, understand it and understand those requirements. And also understand who are the internal stakeholders that will participate in a decision relative to this procurement process. So what do I mean by internal stakeholders? Well, of course, there's going to be someone in finance, right, that signs off and says like, yes, we have money from your budget to pay for this, right? So that should be a very straightforward thing. Now, the other stakeholders are where this can get complicated, and you really need to understand this part. And that is there some sort of cybersecurity review that takes place? And how does that happen? And adjacent to that is internal IT and or enterprise apps, depending on the size of your company and how it's structured. Are they going to participate in this decision, right? And then finally, who has the ultimate, decision-making power? If you in legal are the ones leading the project, then you want to make sure that is you, right? But it may be your finance department. And if it is, then you want to make sure that your influence is made on that and that you drive them to the right outcome relative to the project that will deliver value for them and for you, right? But this is really important to know because so often folks can get really far down the road on planning out their contract management process, engaging with, say us as a vendor, and then realize, oh, like we have all of these like internal hoops that we have to go through. And we actually didn't like talk to anyone about this. Like cybersecurity has all of these questionnaires and things, and our internal IT wants us to now, look at these other vendors and all of this stuff, right? And so you want to know that at the outset, because that allows you to best navigate working with those stakeholders, right? And ensuring that you are out in front of those things to ensure that your project doesn't get derailed and that your vision for it can be realized. So spending the time to think through these things as you approach your project is as important as what you ultimately identify as your goals. Because if you don't do this work, then you're not going to launch, right? You're going to build this amazing plane and you're just going to be like, man, this is going to be the best plane ever. Well, then if it just sits on the runway, then it was a lot of time that you spent for nothing. So this is the stuff to be really good at and really understand so that you can get that money for your project. And again, make sure that person that approves your budget is like, yep, love it, understand it, work with procurement, make it happen. Now, I want to cover how you build and make your case because, one of the things that can happen through the procurement process is that you can maybe be derailed because IT likes to be helpful and is going to suggest maybe some different paths from what you've been thinking about. So whoever it is, whether it's IT, whether it's finance, your business sales team, this is how you can build and make your case. So, oops, we renewed something we didn't want to. Put it in your journal. Keep your journal, maybe it's just one notebook, and just however you want to track it. It's up to you, right? It's not important. The important thing is keep a running list of these things that would have been avoided if you had contract management. So we renewed something we didn't want to, write it down, write down the date, write down the amount, keep track. Outside counsel spend rose because we are out of bandwidth internally, right? Put that in your journal. Say on this date, we sent this amount of work and for Q4, we had an increase of this percentage over the prior quarter or over the prior year, right? Document that in your journal. Complaints on anything, anybody in the business has about getting to contracts or not knowing contracts or any problem with contracts, put those in your journal, right? Because you want to be able to read from that when it comes time to make your case. And again, you can do that not just by keeping the journal and documenting it on a one-time basis, but be a pest. Make it a point to also raise these issues you track with these decision makers, especially that person who holds the purse strings, right? Make it a point so that they are hyper aware every time that there was, say, money that would have been saved had we had contract management, or whatever these are. Make sure that you are making noise about that. Share scholarly articles with your stakeholders, right? This is a link to the one I had on ACC, but other people are putting out good stuff besides me that you can look up and share. Now, the final thing here, and I have full slides on it because it's such a critical part of how you build and make your case, is don't just share your vision for contract management, but also the adoption plan. So I know this is hard because it's a little bit in conflict with my advice a minute ago, which was like, make sure you don't spend time doing other stuff before you get the budget and all of that. But assuming that you feel like you're going to have the funding, and so you do have something to sell, well, then you need to think through the adoption plan when you're thinking about contract management, because that is likely why so many contract management implementations, people that I'm not associated with, aren't successful, because folks do not think about the adoption plan on the front end. And I can tell you that when you're working with a business who has implemented enterprise solutions before, they know that there are failures, and they know that those failures typically relate to them not being adopted. So when you come to them and you're pitching them on your idea and you talk through the adoption plan, that person with experience is going to have more confidence in what you're proposing, because you've been thoughtful about this really important component that the success of the contract management and its ultimately ability to provide value to the business is hinging on. So I've called the adoption plan kind of the final key in building confidence in your plan to get buy-in to contract management from your business. So when you think about it, think about just, first of all, what is adoption? Like, what does that mean? So for me, when you're looking at a contract management solution, it means that the solution is part of that user's daily work. Like when I need contracts or information, I'm using my contract management solution. And thus, that solution should be used for the purpose it was designed for, right? We use this to store contracts, to look up contracts, to manage the intake of contracts, not to just do a portion of what we invested in, right? Like it's a glorified filing cabinet. It doesn't even actually digitize and make things searchable, right? That's what you want to avoid. And you also want to make sure that this implementation means that all of those prior methods, processes, and solutions have actually been replaced. You're no longer communicating over email to work on a deal. You have an app where you're doing that work and it's maintaining the visibility of the deal in process. Or instead of going to your desktop or this old SharePoint folder, you are actually using the new repository to find out the data and insights that you want about your contracts. And further, you prefer it that way. You're not doing workarounds or pulling contracts from other places that you should not be. So I like to position people to think through adoption in this way: the mental, emotional, and practical components. So mentally means I understand why adopting a new solution makes sense for me in the business. Emotionally, I feel comfortable embracing this, and I'm not afraid to give up the way I used to do stuff. And practical means I actually know how to do it, and I can readily use it and make use of it. So when you're thinking about this for your business, here's kind of the main things that I want you to have a forethought to ensure that when you're talking through this with your business, they feel nothing but confidence in you and the path that you're presenting, right? So on the mental side, when you think about a solution, avoid major change management, like imposing multiple new workflows on many, many different people. And you want to do that, and that caution is because people don't want to have to learn stuff over again or change how they think about things, because they'll resist that, right? And so that's something in the course of working with my product team on Contract Q, which is our app for contract workflow and approvals and managing intake, was that I didn't want it to introduce a bunch of crazy stuff where this is requiring abundant data entry on the person requesting or on me in order to get the contract going, that it wasn't imposing a proprietary editor or anything like that, right? I negotiate and work. Let's leave that in place. What I wanted to do is make sure that it's being an electronic embodiment of a familiar process that really does the job of addressing that acute pain that we feel in the creation process because we don't have visibility into the current status of the deal. That's what I want to do with that, with that mental thing, because then if the salesperson is like, I see very clearly how this is easier for me, I in legal see this is easier for me too, then mentally I'm there. Whereas if it's overwhelming how many things are going to be new and different, then that's a sign that this is going to be likely unsuccessful in adoption. And I had experience with an unsuccessful CLM adoption supporting the procurement team. And after that first year, we canceled and we gave that business to my current company to do the procurement contracts as well. So the emotional part, right, is your team is going to be like, okay, I'm used to always getting my contracts here, and now you're saying I have to go here. That's scary to me. Well, you can talk through that just by saying, look, like, we will not shut off the old stuff until we're live with the new, and you're comfortable with that, right? So you don't want people to automatically resist because you're telling them that, this is going to be a heavy-handed approach. You want to let them know that, look, you're going to be positioned for success. We're going to make sure that you love doing this, right? Before you're, where we end of life this old server, et cetera. So the practical part is so key. And it's something that we were very thoughtful about at Vertafore, and that was leveraging the currently adopted systems. So I think that CRM integration is a really ideal approach. It's not essential, but if you're not doing a CRM approach, then you should have at least SSO so that you're avoiding, another, sign on and login information for people to remember. But what we really liked about the CRM integration, we had Salesforce, was that it allowed people to get to the contracts where they were already doing their work. And I read a Harvard Business Review article recently that we lose like 4 hours context switching from like one system to another. So I think that is yet another really important factor in thinking through the practical component, right? Which is that if it's in an adopted system, not only is it more readily adoptable by the users, but it's also more efficient because now you're ensuring against that lost time from context switching. So these are really kind of the core keys when you're thinking through adoption, that if you know that you've covered these and you can talk about this adoption plan with your business, then that's going to be very easy for them to buy into and give them a lot of confidence that this investment not only is going to be valuable, but it's going to be worthwhile, right? A lot of times you can demonstrate the value and you can, in fact, have a solution to your problem. But if that solution is not adopted, then you have not succeeded. You have failed, right? So make no mistake, understanding and thinking through that adoption piece on the front end is really critical. So I want to give you some kind of key planning tips for contract management goals as you kind of think through them. And they're all really important because these projects are really critical to get right. And there's a lot of people out there in this space, right? It's very noisy. So I think if you can stay focused on these goals, you'll likely end up working with the right partner and being successful with your contract management. So the first one is that I want you all to realize you don't have to be better at everything all at once. And I think this is a mistake that a lot of folks make when they think about contract management, is they think that the fact that there is a concept of contract lifecycle management, that should then mean that their solution should address all of the contract lifecycle, when that's really not the case, right? When I was born, like my parents had the stuff for babies, like they did not buy a casket for my funeral because totally different part of the life cycle, not relevant to the part of the life cycle we're in at that time, right? So similarly, right, if you want to be like, look, way more contracts that are executed are relevant to our business than the ones that are in flight, because not all of them get signed, but the stuff in place that runs our business. So knowing what those commitments are, like, we understand that's table stakes. So that's what we want to be better at first. Now, doesn't mean that you can't have a solution that addresses other things, right? Or does improve multiple things for you at once. But the point is to always remember that you don't have to go down that path, right? Don't allow yourself to be distracted and taken down a route that you feel isn't really what you need today, right? And quick wins are really important with these types of solutions because that's how you get to demonstrate value more quickly. Remember this, you don't have to break what's working. The failure I experienced on the procurement side, and our procurement team led that RFP, not legal, was that they broke what was working on the contract intake process. They made it harder. They imposed a solution that required data entry to get a contract request launched. And it introduced a lot of change management relative to communicating and how that communication works within this CLM, right? And you don't have to do that, right? You can implement a contract repository from Pramata, and that doesn't have to have any impact on a contract process that you have and you like that's working, right? Similarly, if you have a great repository, but you're struggling with intake, you shouldn't have to be forced to abandon a repository solution that you like just to benefit from an intake solution, right? Avoid the trap of breaking what's working, because that's not the best way to approach a solution, right? Also know this, you can limit the amount of change management by taking an approach where you're really essentially implementing what is kind of a lean, agile product development philosophy. So for those who aren't familiar, there are two types of software development. There's waterfall, where you plan every feature and function that you're going to build for this software program at the beginning. Then there's agile, where you have 2-week sprints where you identify one feature that you're going to deliver and release for your software, and you iteratively build that based on feedback that you get from users. So part of that lean agile framework is the lean part, which is that you're only doing that minimal viable product to start out. So when you think about contract management and how this would apply to basically productizing your contract management at your company, that MVP, that minimal viable product, is what is the minimum thing, solution, tool in contract management that we feel we can implement that provides value and that we can then build on, right? And so for me, that typically is you start with a repository, and then from that repository, you can learn, right? So focus on quick wins that position you for future wins. So if I have a repository and that repository can help me understand, what do I negotiate the most? What do I never negotiate? Well, then that can help me understand when I'm thinking about things for contract intake, for potentially automating the way that I'm creating contracts, knowing which terms I negotiate, how I change them by having that insight to all my existing contracts positions me to be really good at that, right? Versus building that on assumptions that are being, delivered to me maybe from this person who has a point of view on CLM because their CLM requires you to solve for everything in order for it to be successful, right? These quick wins are a way to get to future wins, right? Because the business will have confidence in you to continue investing. And so you do that by avoid problematizing your entire contracting process. There are folks who are more than happy to do that for you. It's conceivable in some cases you may want them to, because that you're just that adrift on contract management. But I would say you should avoid it if you feel like there are parts of your contracting process that are okay and they just need some sort of electronic system around them. But what you don't want to do is go with some sort of CLM solution which requires you to come up with a way to solve for everything that you're doing within their system. Why? Because that's time consuming. And then that then adds yet another factor or point of failure in your CLM process. And that's why you hear stories about CLMs that take 2 years to implement and then they fail because they have so many things to get right that it's likely they won't. And then the failure. And the other problem, right, is that it takes you years to figure it out. So you don't even get the benefit of quick win when you're really focused on what you specifically want to be better at with contracts as you explore contract management. And so that's kind of my final point here on your planning is that remember, you are the expert on you. You know what works at your company, you know what doesn't, and you know what you most want to improve, right? And so if you're talking to someone like me or someone else who has expertise in contract management, understand that while we can share experiences and while we have expertise on contract management, we shouldn't be the one telling you how it should work at your business. The right people and the right solutions to work with are going to be the ones where they are focused on understanding what you want to be better at and how they can use their solutions to support that. If you're coming at it from a different approach, I really feel like that's ultimately an orthogonal one and not the one that's going to get you to the best outcome. So I really want to just share with you what I feel are kind of this is my quadrant of excellence and best practices in contract management so that you kind of have a North Star. So the first is organization, being organized. Having a centralized self-service location is a best practice because that access is a force multiplier of efficiency to everybody in the organization that's doing work and having tasks with a nexus requiring access to or information from a contract, period. Makes you fast, right? The business speeds up when every key term is digitized and you can extract those key terms instead of waiting for reports to come back about how many agreements and what our exposure is on something, or being able to quickly advise the business. This is the answer, right? That speed is huge for an organization. And so that's why having the full digitization and extraction from your existing contracts is a critical best practice. So the deal accelerator, this is where you're leveraging information. You're accelerating the deals because your system of workflows and approvals makes that process faster. And additionally, you're able to access the deals you've done before to leverage that information to quickly arrive at the best outcome for your next deal. This also improves your reliability. Anyone who has the experience of using legal at your company's domain.com as the central point of intake for legal requests knows that is a bad paradigm. And no matter how good you are, stuff can fall through the cracks, right? And it impacts your reputation in the legal department. And it's just by nature of the fact that it was designed for communication, not for tracking traffic. So when you have contract management to make that attack surface drawn down to just one place where all those requests are trackable, well, you've achieved excellence in contract management because not only is it a better experience for those folks in your business, but you having it in one place can then have metrics, right? And actually understand things like turnaround times and deal volumes, things that you need to know when it comes time to ask for additional resources from the business. So how do we help at Pramata? Well, we are laser focused. We make MVPs. We drive strategic value for your business. So just so you know, we're the only partner out there that handles the heavy lifting. There's literally nothing for you to do, but just send us your contracts. And that's how we help elevate your strategic impact with the business. You can deliver these reports. You can show these metrics that show unambiguously, this is what we do for you guys. And that's why we make that partnership between the legal department and the business the center of our universe. That is our star. So that's my presentation. I really appreciate you all sitting through. Tomorrow is going to be a much more exciting one with Netta from Contract Nerds. And so it's the team up of the Contract MVP and the Contract Nerds. So hopefully hopefully you guys will check that out. And also, I hope that anybody who wants to talk more about this with me will reach out as well. And I'm going to kick it back to Shai to help lead us through some questions.
Sure. So thank you again, Foster. That was a presentation jam-packed with great practical advice and insights into, how to make the case and bring a contract management solution to your organization. Folks in the chat, if you want to, drop any questions in the chat box, you are free to do so. Also, if you want to stick around for virtual networking after this, you can turn on your camera, let us know. So far, I don't have so many questions, but I do have a few. In your experience, Foster, I guess what are besides for legal, what are the business units that have a say over contract, like whether to implement a contract management solution? And are you ever called in to talk to them directly about, you got through legal, but now you have to get through them?
I am. I just had one of those conversations recently, and that was with not internal IT, but that was with sales ops, or I've seen now that suddenly everybody's kind of called RevOps, but in any case, that group, right? Because part of solutions with contract management sometimes will have a nexus with operationalizing a sale, right? With the sales ops team. And so how that happens is going to be something that they're going to want to have a say in. So for example, a lot of companies are looking to implement things that make it easier for, say, salespeople to create actual sales orders and contracts. So that's something like CPQ, so configure price quote. And that's something that some folks might be familiar with. Well, even when you make an investment in that, as we all know, there's always that subset of customers who are able to require you to do stuff out of your standard normal process, right? And sometimes it might be, 5%, but it could be as many as 50% of customers, right? It just depends on the nature of your business. And so for me, I was in a situation where sales ops had a vision for an app that they were building that would kind of be supporting legal and its intake. And that same legal department really liked our contract Q app. And so I had to talk through with sales ops, what are the trade-offs? What are the benefits of using, this contract management tool, versus trying to create something in-house. And those conversations will often come up in contract management because those people and their jobs have some kind of nexus with that contract management thing. So in addition to sales ops, you also see this come up with IT and enterprise apps. And that comes up because they have to do some sort of work. And there are basically two types of IT and enterprise apps people in the world. There are ones who want to know that this is not going to be any additional work for them whatsoever. And then there's the other type who are I want to know that this is going to require work from me so that I can show my value to the organization, right? So you kind of have those two types, and it's good to kind of feel out, right? Which type they are. Is this someone who's gung-ho to be I want to show off what I can do with my Salesforce, know-how relative to your, solution that integrates with it? Or is this someone who's I have so many other projects. Please tell me that this project is not going to require anything from me if we want to do this, right? So try to get a read on that, right? Because then you sell into that when you're doing those conversations with the internal stakeholder, right? So if the person who's I cannot, you're this is going to be the straw on this camel's back. I want to make sure that they know this is not the straw, right? And have that conversation and really impress upon them, hey, this is not a you thing. This is a me thing. And Pramata will do the heavy lift, or whomever, right? And then, if it is a person where they can be upsell, then make them understand how you will include them, right? Or how you will try to cater to their participation. Understand how you can do that by talking through it with your partner as well. That's always a good idea, but to strategize, but try to understand what that means so that person kind of feels satisfied about your approach, right? That's my experience. I mean, there might be people a little more dynamic than that, but those are typically, the two types I find in IT. So in that case, I would say try to understand which one you're talking to and try to, sell it to them accordingly.
Got it. One more question I'm curious about. Let's say there's a legal department out there who's interested in bringing on, a CLM solution. Do you ever help legal departments with either get budget or make the case for getting budget to add on the CLM? Are you ever, called on to help them, talk to, I guess it's finance. It seems like finance holds the purse strings, but what's your experience in helping, legal departments get more budget?
Yeah, I have done all the coaching in in the space you can imagine, including coaching up people on how to have those conversations and positioning them to be successful at that. Because if you haven't done it before, or if you have, like if you haven't done it for contract management before, right? It's a different animal. And it's not always like straightforward. And so it's one of those things, like with anything, like a little training and a little coaching goes a long way, right? And so that's something that, yes, when I work with folks on a solution, because I'm so invested in them actually being successful, I want to make sure that I equip them with that, because that's ultimately like, our success is intertwined with them, right? Because we don't get a customer if you don't get a budget, and you don't get, extracted from whatever bad contract situation you are without getting a solution. So absolutely happy to help with that stuff, with this person who asked or anybody else.
Awesome. All right, I guess we're going to wrap it up. Any last remarks, Foster? I think you did a good job wrapping up before, but anything you want to say before we go to do a little virtual networking?
I will just say that anybody who would like kind of a fun way to bring up the issue of better managing your contracts, I'm going to share a link to my music video, Wild Agreements, which is about the need for contract management, and probably a funner way to persuade business than they've experienced before. So at throwing those, I put my email so folks can reach out, and then also a link to YouTube. So appreciate everyone showing up today. I hope to see some people tomorrow. That presentation is going to be straight fire with Netta. And yeah, hope to hear from folks. And again, appreciate your time this afternoon. And I wish everybody nothing but success with contract management, because nothing is more awesome as an in-house attorney than having like really great contract management system.
Awesome. Thank you, Foster.